Good morning and welcome to this presentation on K-12 school finance. My name is Susan Pendergrass. I'm the Director of Education Policy at the Show Me Institute. And we're excited to partner today with EdChoice and the Reason Foundation for this event. For those of you who don't know, the Show Me Institute, we're an independent research and education organization. We focus on Missouri public policy from a free market perspective, and we use our research to develop policy proposals that increase economic and educational opportunities for Missourians. You can find out more about us at showmeinstitute.org. But today we're going to be talking to Marty Lueken and Christian Barnard about a project that EdChoice and Reason Foundation launched earlier this year. They've created a brand new tool called the K-12 School Choice Calculator, which you can find at schoolchoicecalculator.com. And it provides legislators, legislative staff, and other stakeholders with an easy way to learn about the potential fiscal effects. You guys are going to tell us more from school choice programs, which are kind of popping up everywhere. So it's really interesting to be able to use. Our speakers today will be Marty Lueken, the director of EdChoice's Fiscal Research and Education Center, where he focuses on research and analysis of issues that pertain to school choice bills, current programs, and school funding, and also conducts analyses on and research on school choice and fiscal policies in general. And also Christian Barnard, the Assistant Director of Education Reform at the Reason Foundation, where he oversees and conducts K-12 analyses of state K-12 finance systems, a very complicated topic that not that many people dive into, and on the fiscal effects of school choice. He works directly with policymakers and stakeholders from all across the country, and we're very happy to have him talking to us today in Missouri. So at that, I will turn it over to you, Marty.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. Really appreciate this. So everyone, thanks for joining. I want to thank Susan and the Show Me Institute for having us. I appreciate this partnership that EdChoice and Show Me have had, in the past, and all the awesome work that y'all are doing to, expand educational freedom as well as other, policy areas in Missouri. So as a native St. Louisan, I grew up in St. Louis in the 80s and 90s. So it's nice to be sharing some of our work with the Missouri audience. And so we are here to introduce and demonstrate a cool new tool called the K-12 School Choice Calculator. And let me some slides to show folks. Okay. So a little disclaimer first. We're going to be talking about fiscal issues only. So that doesn't mean that Christian and I think that states should have choice only for fiscal reasons. There are lots of really good reasons to have choice and expand choice in your states. Fiscal reasons might be one of them, but there are other and I think more important reasons for having choice. And before we dive right into the tool, I want to give a few brief remarks about EdChoice and our mission, in case you're not familiar with us. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan, mission-driven organization. We are we were founded by Milton and Rose D. Friedman. Milton Friedman is a Nobel laureate economist. Rose is his wife, and sadly, they are no longer with us today. So we are the intellectual legacy of them. They founded our organization in 1996, and we strive to be honest brokers of school choice data and research. And our mission is simple. It's to advance educational freedom and choice for all as a pathway to successful lives and a stronger society. So now back to the calculator here. This is a tool for basically anyone who's interested in learning about the potential fiscal impact of private educational choice programs in their states. It provides a range of fiscal estimates on taxpayers for a choice program based on certain parameters that users input into the tool. So you get to design a choice program with this tool. So you might be asking, why this tool? Do any of these quotes sound familiar to anyone? Have you heard any of these? So these are claims by skeptics and by choice opponents, and these claims are quite pervasive. So as a researcher who studies choice for a living, I hear some version of these about every day. Now, these claims range from choice draining or siphoning resources from public schools to choice outright destroying public schools. Now, we've had choice for decades now, and I don't think that any of these claims reflect today's reality. Certainly not in Missouri. But these are, I think, legitimate concerns, to be sure. And I, for one, don't want to see, I want all schools to succeed and flourish, whatever type they are, whatever works for a child and the child's needs, right? And so the school choice calculator is intended to help address some of these concerns by showcasing the potential fiscal effects of educational choice programs in your state. Because the idea is that fundamental to these claims is the idea that they're going to lead to a mass exodus of kids from the public school system, and therefore a huge loss of funding. And so we want to provide some context for that. But before we demo the calculator itself, it is helpful, I think, to take a peek under the hood to understand how some of the machinery works, so that users can employ this tool properly and effectively. It's also important to understand what this tool does and what its limitations are. So what this tool does is that it's going to generate a range of estimates for the fiscal effects of educational choice programs that accrue to state and local taxpayers combined. So it's going to provide an overall fiscal effect. Now, this tool does not track how each dollar flows, in order to demonstrate a budgetary effect. That is, it's not going to isolate the fiscal impact on the state's general fund only, or the fiscal impact on state and local taxpayers and school districts only. So that's what a legislative fiscal note does. And that requires application of the state's funding formula, which some of you may know tends to be incredibly complex. So EdChoice, we've been producing impactful fiscal notes for legislators and for our state partners for more than 20 years. And that's a service that we happily will continue to provide for our partners. That doesn't mean, though, that this tool can't be useful for you. On the contrary, I think that it can be useful, that it is useful from the point of view of the taxpayer, because the taxpayer pays both state tax and local taxes that fund public schools. And they may not necessarily care which pot it's coming from or which pot it's going, money is going to. So for the taxpayer, the overall fiscal effect may be more relevant than a state budgetary effect. Now, the calculator employs the same methodology as that used in EdChoice's fiscal effects reports. For those in the audience who are really ambitious and interested in fiscal issues and love formulas and love math and algebra and stuff, I encourage you to check out the method section in this report to get a deeper understanding of the mechanics. So the fiscal impact by a choice program, it's going to be governed by a simple equation that weighs both the costs and the savings, or the fiscal benefits from the choice program. So the savings are going to come from switchers, and the overall cost of the program is basically going to be the sticker price. Switchers are students who would have attended a public school without the financial assistance from the educational program, the educational choice program itself. So they're going to be a key factor in these calculations because they're going to generate savings. They represent savings because taxpayers no longer have to support their education in public schools when they leave the public school system. Now we have switchers, so as it stands to reason, there are also non-switchers in choice programs, and they're also important because non-switchers are students who would have attended an educational setting outside of the public school system, even without the financial assistance from a choice program. So they would be enrolled in a private school, a homeschool setting, whatever, regardless of receiving this financial assistance. And they're important because they don't generate any savings and they represent a pure cost. So just as a really brief example, let's say you have an education savings account or an ESA that costs $5,000 and it costs $15,000 to educate a student in a public school, then the program will generate $10,000 in net fiscal benefits for taxpayers when a student switches from a public school into the ESA program. And if, on the other hand, the ESA is awarded to as a non-switcher, then the program will generate a net cost of $5,000. There won't be any savings offset for that. Okay. So there are three key factors in the fiscal effects calculus. The obvious one is the cost of the ESA or the cost of the voucher or the scholarship. The second is the number of students who participate in the choice program, and specifically the makeup of switchers and non-switcher and the non-switcher groups. That's going to be key. And then finally, the short run and long run variable costs of the public school system is going to be also an important factor. And I'll go over each of these components briefly. So the obvious factor, that's the cost of the scholarship or ESA or voucher. This figure, coupled with the number of participants, is going to determine the overall program cost. On a per student basis, choice programs in the US on average cost roughly 1/3 of the cost to educate the same students in public schools. So we're talking about roughly $5,800 average cost for choice programs compared to about $15,000 for public schools. And these data are lagged by a few years too. So these amounts might be higher, but the gaps are roughly the same. This funding gap between choice programs and public schools that creates significant fiscal benefits for taxpayers and the public schools when students switch from public schools. Now, how these benefits are distributed between different taxpayers and school districts, that's going to depend on the state's funding formula. And as I mentioned before, that's a really complicated exercise. And that is one of the limitations for this tool. For a student switcher, the overall effect in the long run will be this funding gap that you see. Now, the number of students participating in a choice program is another factor. Okay. The take-up rate is the number of students participating in a program divided by the number of eligible students for the program. And here are some data on participation rates for choice programs between 1990 and 2021. These data here, they're showing the rates by years and by year in operation, and they cover basically programs operating in the pre-universal era of choice. And by that I mean that we're currently in the universal era of choice because since COVID, since the pandemic, at least 11 states have created or expanded to universal or to near universal choice programs. So overall, you'll can probably see that the choice programs tend to begin very small, and they grow slowly over time. The first row shows that the take-up rate in the first year of the programs was about 0.5%. By year 5, participation increased to almost 1.7% of eligible students on average. And then the rows below that will breaks down the take-up rates by program type. So these rates reflect mostly targeted programs, like programs geared towards lower income students. There are also programs that focus on special needs students only, or students in special education. There are also programs that require students to have been enrolled in a public school before they can participate in a program. These data here can be found in a brief on our website, but I just wanted to highlight these data because I think that they can be helpful for using the calculator, and they will be helpful for projecting the fiscal impact of programs, particularly those programs with limited eligibility. But what about universal programs or programs that have broad eligibility requirements? Well, even though data are quite limited on universal programs, that hasn't stopped some folks from saying a lot of things about these programs and making certain claims. So my advice to you is to be careful where you get your information from. One claim that we hear is that all or most eligible students will use a choice program, and why not? It's free money for some, and so why wouldn't someone use it? Another increasingly common claim you might have heard is that something like 70 to 90% of ESA students were already in private schools. And some of these claims are based on government reports that disclose certain information and certain data, which choice opponents, frankly, have been using, I think, in deceitful ways to talk about this topic and talk about student switchers. So just as an example, the Arizona Department of Education, they reported that 21% of ESA students were, quote, in public school immediately before ESA enrollment, unquote, during the first year. Opponents in some media reports have used this data to basically say that about 80% of Arizona students were non-switchers. They were already in private schools or homeschool. That's really misleading because Arizona, like many other states, has many different kinds of choice programs. And some of these students came from those other programs. So that also means that some of these students might have switched from public schools to one of Arizona's tax credit scholarship programs, and then at some point switched from that scholarship program into the ESA program. So that means that this student is being counted as a non-switcher, or is taken as one based on this report, when in fact they might have originated in a public school. And then we see that there's been a similar case for Iowa. But so why do we care about this? Well, really high non-switcher rates are going to increase program costs for the choice programs. Opponents are using these data to basically create this narrative that universal programs have very high costs and are busting state budgets. As it turns out, these claims significantly overstate the non-switcher rate. And data that I've analyzed so far suggests the opposite. So 2 key inputs for the calculator are going to be the take-up rate among eligible public school students. So those are going to be switchers, and the take-up rate among eligible non-public school students, those are the non-switchers. This table summarizes results from a data analysis that I did on ESA programs in Iowa and New Hampshire. And I wrote a brief about this recently, about switchers, which can be found on our website. And you can find this table and this information there. So the first row shows the public take-up rate. That's the switchers. So this is the percentage of eligible students in public school who participate in ESA programs. So in Iowa's first year, the public take-up rate was 2.5%. In New Hampshire, the public take-up rate was almost 2% in the first year, and then about 3% in the second and the third years. The new row, or the next row, that shows the non-public take-up rate. So that's going to be the non-switchers. This is the percentage of eligible students in private schools and homeschool settings who participate in the ESA program. So in Iowa's first year, the non-public take-up rate was about 23%. In New Hampshire, the non-public take-up rate was 20% in the first year, and it was about 30% in the second and third years. I'm currently working on analysis of some data for other programs that I've obtained, and hopefully I'll have those results written up soon. But in the meantime, I think that these data are going to be more reliable than the claims that have been reported by the media or trumpeted by school choice opponents, and as well as in some of the reports by the government reports that have been reporting information in different ways. So finally, the last key factor or variable for the calculator is going to be variable costs. Variable costs are educational costs that change directly or proportionally with enrollment. So these are going to be things like textbooks, software licenses, personnel costs, things like that. Fixed costs are educational costs that do not change when enrollment changes. Examples of fixed costs will include debt service, building costs, maintenance, and administrative costs. Now, has anyone heard someone say that a state can't have choice because public schools have to keep the lights on? Well, they're referring to fixed costs in this statement. So in the short run, it turns out that some costs are fixed and other costs are variable. Some economists estimate that on average, about 2/3 of total educational costs are variable, and about 1/3 of costs are going to be fixed in the short run. In the long run, all costs are variable, meaning that over time, districts can fully adjust their operations for any given change in enrollment. Variable costs are another important factor for the calculator because they represent the fiscal benefits for school districts and for local taxpayers. Now, here's the good news. You don't have to worry about variable costs because the calculator will take care of that for you under the hood. But again, if you're feeling adventurous and you want to learn more about these, you can go to the methods section in the school choice calculators page for details. And you can also refer to the fiscal effects report on EdChoice's website for more detail. So with that, if you're still with us, made it, appreciate it. I think everyone here you're all fiscal experts now and ready to be unleashed into the world. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Christian, who will now demo the calculator.
Great. Thanks, Marty, and thank you to the Show Me Institute for having us on. And it's exciting to get to pilot this tool. I'm just going to share my screen now. Can everyone see that? So now that Marty's kind of gone through, kind of what's going on under the hood in this calculator, we're about to take it for a test drive. But I will say this is a great time in Missouri specifically to be using this tool. As you all might know, that there was a recent expansion that was just approved for your school choice program, and this is about the time that you'll hear new reporting, new claims about the cost of a school choice program. And so it's a great time to be equipped with this tool to be able to kind of parse what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and understand how really the school choice expansion financially will be affecting taxpayers. So What we have in the calculator is a bunch of options, but there aren't too many inputs you have to do. I'll emphasize up front that, of course, the results you get for the calculator are only going to be as good as the assumptions that you put in. So as I walk through, I'll explain some of my assumptions, but there's nothing magic about what I'm going to be plugging in. And any of you might plug in different numbers based on assumptions that you think are more reasonable. So first, because the tool is using federal data on fixed and variable costs and student enrollment, household income, we can choose a state. So I'll go to Missouri really quick. So now Missouri is the selected state. And here is the main input panel. There's 4 inputs you're going to put in. And I'll also say too, there's a side input panel. So based on whatever I enter into the input panel at the top, as we scroll down, you'll be able to see those assumptions as you go down and look at the various charts that we have in the calculator. So I'll just go right to the actual program specifics that we have in Missouri. So right now, there is the program is income-based. It's not available to all families. It's not a universal school choice program. If we have time, I'll actually run you through a potential universal school choice fiscal effects scenario for Missouri. But I just chose an income-based picture. And what just happened in Missouri was that there was an expansion, and now it's statewide that families can use the Missouri Scholars Program. And also, it's not just there's a higher income cap now. Before, it was 200% of free and reduced price lunch students and below who could participate. Now it's 300%. So essentially, eligibility and the program cost cap has been expanded in Missouri. So what I'm going to do is check up to, so the new income threshold is about $166,000 a year for a family of 4. For simplicity, I'm going to go up to 150K in this tool. And then I'm going to plug in a 1.5% take-up rate. So this is public school. These are would-be switchers, if you will. So students who would have otherwise enrolled in public school, I'm assuming that 1.5% of eligible students, as I just checked with the income boxes, will choose to participate in the school choice program. I'm actually going to set the non-public take-up rate pretty low for now. We can toggle this a little bit just so I can show you. I'm setting it low because the Missouri program is prioritizing higher need families and higher need students. And so the cost cap has been raised, but it's the first in line are going to be families or students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, students who were already enrolled in the previously means tested or the means tested school choice program, students with disabilities. So I'm assuming a lot of these students are coming from public schools and weren't already previously enrolled in or wouldn't have enrolled in private schools or non-public schools otherwise. And then I'll put in, I think, what was it, Marty, 6,300? Not to put you on the spot for Missouri. So I just plugged in those inputs for Missouri, and I'm going to scroll down. And now the calculator has generated some fiscal effects data points for us based on the federal data that we have. So based on the assumptions I just put in, this new school choice expansion could generate $3 million in short-run net fiscal benefits to taxpayers, and in the long run, up to $66 million in long-run net fiscal benefits. Now, before I scroll down and show you some of the other charts, I'll show you that this tool is dynamic. I mean, so let's say that my non-public take-up rate, you might be thinking that's pretty low, 2%. There probably are more eligible non-public families who would want to use the program. I'll bump it up to say 5%. Now it's actually showing a short run, very modest short run net fiscal cost, but still a long run, about 47.7 million long run net fiscal benefit. So let's say, but then we could also say the public take-up rate might be higher. And Missouri has had school choice for some time now, albeit limited. So what if we toggle up the public's take-up rate, so the switchers? What's happening here is you're seeing, as I increase that percentage, the fiscal costs, the short run net fiscal cost is going down up at 4%. It turns into savings, and the long run net fiscal benefits are also going up. I'm going to go back to just 1.5% here. And then based on our inputs, and you can still see on the right, the control panel is still there. So if you start forgetting everything you put in, it can travel with you as you scroll down. This summarizes the short run and long run fiscal effect based on the ESA amounts, the total number of participating students, and the eligibility rate statewide based on the income criteria I plugged in. So based on that income criteria I plugged in, about 80% of students statewide would be eligible. And then the switcher rate that we have right now, meaning the percentage of students who would have otherwise attended public schools, as Marty explained, is 69.4%. I'll keep scrolling down, and this tool also just summarizes the variable cost and the average total cost in public schools compared to the ESA cost that I plugged in. So the ESA cost is $6,300. So that's a little bit lower than the short run average variable cost, meaning that public school switcher students not only will be, they're not just going to be fiscally neutral, they're going to be generating additional savings when they switch to the ESA in the short run even. And in the long run, they will generate substantially, almost, about double the fiscal savings. That's just for switchers. And just to put this in context, I know I plugged in some assumptions that would make the current ESA costs that in Missouri in this scenario actually higher than the newly adopted cap. So right now, under this scenario, under the assumptions, the ESA cost would be about $100 million. We always just want to keep a sense of scale, because that sounds like a lot of money, but you forget that in public education. So this is lagged data, like Marty said, but public education is getting $12.3 billion. So that just kind of gives you a sense of proportion when we're talking about the cost of these ESA programs, even under the scenarios that I plugged in. And then finally, the chart also shows just the number of students, K-12 students statewide who would be ESA students compared to the current number of public school students. And then at the bottom, the math is fleshed out for you all. Before I finish too, you might be thinking, okay, what if we want to take school choice in Missouri universal? What would that potentially look like? Well, we have a setting for that as well. So now the income criteria drop off because we're talking about a universal program. But I'll keep the ESA amount the same for the sake of simplicity. And I'll just dial this back up to 20%. We really don't know, like Marty was saying, how many students already enrolled in private schools would be interested or able to use a school choice scholarship, even under a universal scenario. So 20% might sound low, but it is tentatively based on some of the data we have from Iowa and New Hampshire so far. I'm going to keep the public school take-up rate the same. And as you see now, because it's a universal program, the costs it goes from having net fiscal benefits to net fiscal costs. Again, doesn't mean the program's not worth adopting, but that's largely because you have a certain number of families already enrolled in private schools utilizing the ESA that weren't previously receiving taxpayer support. But here's the thing, in these universal programs, a lot of them are early, and first in line for a universal program is often going to be the families who have already chosen non-public schools. But over time, what we expect to happen is this number, the non-public take-up rate, to go up. So what happens to these short run and long run fiscal cost estimates as we toggle this up? You start seeing the short run net cost go down, and then even at a 4% public take-up rate, you start to see long run net fiscal benefits. I think I'll leave it there. Again, thank you so much for having me, and we're happy to answer any questions, Marty and I. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and make my video come back. Thank you guys so much. I have a couple of questions. When you, um, what you were just demonstrating there, Christian, you put in the eligibility for the Missouri program as it currently stands, and you got to 81% of the students in the state would be eligible for this program. Where do those data come from?
Yeah,
How did you calculate that?
Marty could speak to that, but that's census data based on distribution of household income by state. The one shortcoming of that is that it doesn't tell you what percentage of eligible families are already enrolled in private schools. So one thing this tool conservatively does is actually assumes a similar income distribution in the private school families as opposed to the public school families. That's the best data we have. Maybe in a few years we'll start getting better data on families already not enrolled in public schools and their average income. But yeah, the new income eligibility adopted in Missouri is actually pretty high. It would cover most families in Missouri. So you're starting to get to that near universal point. So.
Right. So just in thinking about the usefulness of this tool for legislators, when they were discussing, should we go to from 200% of the free and reduced price lunch line to 300% to 400%, they could have used this tool and plugged that in, basically, right? And gotten to what percentage of students in the state would be eligible. Is that right, Marty?
You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
One limitation of the program is that we're counting the cost for all the kids and implying that there's no kind of cap on that. So when we talk about eligibility, we also want to make a distinction between eligible to participate in the program and funded eligible. Funded eligibility would be how many students can actually receive funding. And in Missouri's case, as you know, that was capped at 50 million and that recently raised up to 75 million, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so we're not going to be able to put that cap on that in the tool. At least this version will look.
But we could force it in by if it's 75 million, it's about, I don't know, between 10 and 12,000 scholarships. So we could force that number, right, to be the 12,000.
Yeah.
And in which case, then we would have a sense of how much the program might cost. Now, it's not publicly funded, but to the extent that money's fungible and it comes out of tax revenue. But okay, so
I'm sharing my screen one more time, Susan,
mm-hmm.
just to, exactly what you just said. You can force it in, even given the limit. So what I found using the tool before this is, so if you have, and again, the switcher rate, I'm assuming here can be played with. But if you assume a 1.5% public take up and a 2% non-public take up, again, I'm assuming the 75 that you scroll down, get to, that's 100 million. Maybe it was, I forget exactly what I put in, but you can get it to that total ESA cost that you're looking for, mm-hmm. and then change the switch, the take up rate parameters for those two boxes to start generating a switcher rate estimate and then the actual fiscal effects estimate. And I'm assuming if demand is pretty large for the program and you hit the 75 million cap pretty quickly, you're going to have to prioritize the students who are very likely to be switchers. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Susan.
No, that's fine. I mean, in some cases, in a lot of states, isn't it the case that you can't switch? You have to have attended a public school in the year prior, so you can't really have non-public school take-up rates. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and now some programs will have kind of exceptions in the past. So, for example, West Virginia, their ESA program, when was first adopted, it had a public school prior enrollment requirement, but it allowed kindergarten and I believe first graders as well, regardless to participate regardless of where they were attending. So that would push, but the calculator will account for that. So you can choose grade levels which are exempt from the switcher rate requirement or mm-hmm. the switcher requirement, and get the calculation that way.
Have you been getting feedback from folks who have been using this tool that, oh, I see.
Yeah, and I should have demoed this as well, but this is
No.
exactly what Marty was just saying. There's a grade-based phase-in that you can do and say, so um, only students you can only have switchers in certain grades, essentially, or non-switchers in certain grades. So.
And so then in this case, you can switch in kindergarten first, and then the number of students taking up the scholarships will be adjusted based on what the boxes you're checking there.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
How long did it take you to build this?
This is all Marty's brainchild. So Marty had to build it all in Excel, and I'm sure he's been doing it and doing iterations on it for years. But then I think it took us a couple months to get it into good shape and the shiny app that we have.
Yeah, and have you been getting feedback about folks who have been using it in terms of, has it been? I mean, to me, it seems like it would be helpful, very helpful tool for legislators, but then at the same time, let's see, let me put this in the right terms here. Legislators are busy, and so they only have a limited amount of attention they can give to an individual thing. And so sometimes digging in on something that's complicated can be, a challenge. So have you gotten feedback as to whether folks are finding this to be very useful, difficult, simple, or anything?
Marty, what do you think?
Yeah, the feedback that we've received was that has been fairly simple to use. We have a minimal number of inputs that users have to worry about to put in. But I think once you have a hold on what those assumptions can be or might look like based on the data, then it's a fairly straightforward process, I think.
Are you going to be enhancing it more going forward?
We're thinking of ways to do that. Stay tuned.
Yeah. Part of it is just, again, I think one of the biggest challenges data availability wise is knowing the average income of families not enrolled in public schools, because that really affects, obviously. So if you say you have a program, well, in Missouri, it's very relevant now because you have the income cap, even though it's very generous. I would be interested to see what percentage of already private school families actually qualify under the new income threshold. But I'll say too, the feedback we've been getting is that this is a great way to understand and learn the dynamics of the fiscal effects of school choice. I think what state legislators are often more interested in how it's going to affect the budget specifically. And as Marty noted, this is not a fiscal note calculator.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say, like, the short run variable cost can serve as some kind of proxy for the funding that is immediately portable when a child leaves a public school in Missouri. So like if you scroll down, the short run average variable cost, I don't think that's too far off from your formula WADA allotment. I can't remember what it is exactly.
It's 67 something, but yes.
Yeah. So that is something that I think legislators are more interested in that. But the challenge with that, as Marty explained, is that then you have to understand the dynamics of the funding formula in and out. And that in Missouri specifically, that requires taking considerations for the multiple average daily attendance counts, hold harmless districts. And so that makes the fiscal note a lot harder. But this already gets you kind of, I think, to a pretty good approximation if your assumptions are close. So I think like keeping an eye on the data that your scholarship granting organizations have could actually be really helpful as you start plugging in assumptions in this tool. And if you have understandings of where these students are coming from, new students who are participating in the program, I think you could actually formulate a pretty good fiscal estimate using this tool.
Yeah, and of course it is, sort of the ideal because districts have to, it assumes that districts adjust their expenses down. And in Missouri, as you mentioned, we do have multiple forms of hold harmless that keeps districts insulated from having to do that. But this is good insofar as it's aspirational for legislators to see, like, this is what districts should be reducing their instructional costs by as students move out. But that's a very political argument that doesn't just come down to numbers as some of us would prefer it to do. But well, I just want to say thank you very much for explaining this and demoing it. And I'm sure that as more folks use it and share it, that you'll will get questions. We put your contact information and where to find you guys in the chat box. But I think that this is a really cool tool, and I'm sure I'll use it. And I hope that legislators use it because I love when policy is better informed instead of less informed. So thank you so much. And thank you to EdChoice and to the Recent Foundation and to you individually for coming and showing us today how this works.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And if anyone has suggestions on how to improve the tool, please reach out to Christian and I as well. So
yeah,
that's great.